And I want them to know that I'm going to always be here. As long as I'm alive, I'm going to be here for them, whether they're a young child, 6 years old, or whether they're 40 years old. That as long as I'm alive, I'm going to be here for them.
This is Dadography, a podcast with stories and insights on fatherhood from dads around the globe, dedicated to providing you with the tools and tips to become a better dad. Hey guys, welcome to the Dadography podcast, where we have conversations with dads from around the globe in order to gain insights, tips, and knowledge to help us along our journey of fatherhood. I'm your host, Corey Ward, and here's hoping that today's show will serve you well. Today's guest is a good friend, Mr. Andres Lavanderos, and we'll have an opportunity to speak with him in depth and explore his fatherhood journey. But before getting into our conversation, let me remind you guys to subscribe to the Dadography podcast. Don't miss an opportunity to up your fatherhood wisdom. You can find us on podcast platforms like Spotify, Stitcher, Castbox, Apple Podcasts, and even on YouTube. You can simply type in the Dadography podcast. So let's jump into it, guys. Andres, how's it going, my brother?
I'm doing pretty good, Corey. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, man. I'm super excited to have you on the show and have an opportunity to converse with you a little bit about fatherhood and what it's meant to you and some of the strategies that you employ to make your fatherhood journey worthwhile for yourself and more importantly for your kids, man. One of the things that I really like to do, Andres, is I like to get a sense of my guest experience of fatherhood as a child. And that kind of helps me to understand later on in the conversation how some of the strategies that you employ came to be on your fatherhood journey or why you chose to go complete opposite direction of what you experienced. So tell me a little bit about your dad, man.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's a privilege and an honor to be on your podcast. Grateful to be on. But yeah, my parents came from the country of Chile in 1976 and landed in the state of Indiana. And they landed here essentially knowing zero English. My dad was invited to pastor a Spanish church in the state of Indiana. He pastored there for 5 years, and then he took a pastorate of a Spanish church in Chicago, Illinois, and that's where I was born, in Chicago. It was interesting because when I was born, my parents had been here probably about 7 years in the States. So they knew English, but not well. So I first started hearing Spanish, and then, of course, by the time I started school, English quickly became my predominant language. So, in relation to my dad, from when I was born, was a pastor. We moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, right outside Miami when I was about 8 years old. And from that point forward, my dad never pastored again from the sense of actually pastoring a church full time, which in hindsight is interesting as it relates to this podcast. It was a blessing in disguise because one, it actually gave me great liberty in relation to my relationship with Christ. Because being born into the church is kind of interesting, and being born into the church and then your dad's the pastor is another dynamic. And when my dad stopped pastoring, it allowed me to look at church and Christ and Christianity from a different light, which ultimately, looking back now, was a tremendous blessing. And then, secondly, I would say, while we struggled financially probably my entire childhood, my dad was able to spend a lot of time with me. He loved soccer, football, of course, but my love became basketball, and he just adopted basketball. He still can't tell you about the game, but if I wanted to go shoot, he would grab rebounds with me. When I played football and basketball and baseball, he was there at the games. So he spent a lot of time with me, which is a tremendous blessing. So I would say my upbringing with my dad, my relationship with my dad is good, is strong. And then lastly, I would say, Corey, that what's interesting about adulthood is you really do process your childhood and the way you were parented as a young adult. You actually begin to psychologically, emotionally process that. So I've also been able to process some of my dad's failures and letdowns, which hopefully can serve as wisdom for me as a father now.
I appreciate the fact that you said he didn't have any interest in basketball, but would totally go out and, shoot with you and grab some rebounds. And I'm assuming maybe even watch a game. And that really speaks to how important it is as a father to take interest in our children's interests. I think that there's an opportunity there to form some bonding and some camaraderie. And on this public platform, I will say that I could do better because, for example, one of my sons really enjoys video games. Not that I don't like them. I just, it's not a thing that I would do in my spare time. But I think I could take a page out of your dad's book and maybe just go sit down and play a couple of rounds or whatever they're called on his game to one learn, to really glean from my son and see why he's interested in it, but also just kind of have that mutual appreciation and common ground of conversation and bonding. That's really something special, man, from your dad. Definitely is a plus. No two ways about it. Let me ask you this, Andres. I've got a sense of what your childhood was like. Tell me or walk me through one of your favorite childhood memories with your dad.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, there was a couple great parks, and one in particular called Markham Park. And
Okay.
my dad, when I was young, probably 10, 12, 13 years old, I remember he would often take us to Markham Park, me and my brother. And man, it was just a super cool outing with him. Like the park was so huge, it had different walk pathways through the woods, it had playgrounds. And in particular, two things come to mind. One, I remember he would take us on the trails. And when we started the trail, he would always say, okay, find the biggest stick you can find because if we come across an animal, we'll use it for protection. And as a 10-year-old, man, that like gets the blood pumping. You're like, whoa,
Right, right.
what do you mean? Like, we're gonna fight off hippos? All right, let's do this. I remember that, man. It was like an adventure that my dad took me on. It was super cool. And you go through the trail and then you kind of get to like this little Everglades patch and with the sun dropping. Man, it's just really cool moments, man. And now looking back as a father, I'm like, man, we got to do that for free. Like, it was a state park. There was no entry payment needed. And then at Markham Park, I remember my dad, that's where he taught me how to drive. The park was so huge, it had a bunch of campsites and parking lots. So we would go to Markham Park and he would let me drive and he would teach me to drive there. So those are some rich memories, man, that I remember. Yeah, I enjoyed.
They sound like really quality memories too. I mean, you went to Markham Park and it was free entry. And so the emphasis there was just a quality time together. And mind you, I've taken my kids to, different parks and we've traveled and they've all been exciting times for myself. And as per my kids, it's been awesome times for them as well. But those moments that are just quality where it's not about, the dollars and cents, they really, really, really have huge benefit. And to dads that are listening out there, depending on your economic situation, if you're not able to say, hey guys, let's hop on a plane tomorrow and fly to California and visit Disneyland, it's okay, bro. Feel at ease by finding your nearest local park and just hanging out because that does represent quality time. What about now? Tell me about you now. Are you married, single? How many kids you have? What are you doing in terms of employment? Help me to get a sense of the modern day Andres.
So yeah, married to my wife Jennifer. I met Jennifer in Bible college here in Jacksonville, Florida. We've been married 15 years. We have 4 kids,
Okay.
and my son Jace is now 12. And then I
Hmm.
got 3 girls. Gianna is 9. Jadelyn is 7, and then Jaylee, our youngest, is 5 years old. As far as current status, I've pastored churches. I served 1 year as a missionary in the country of Nicaragua, the city of Managua. And right now, I currently serve as the CEO for Synergy Solar right here out of Jacksonville, Florida.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get that plug in, guys. If you need some solar panels on your home, really cost efficient and would be a huge benefit to you long term. So, listen, here's what I'd like to know as we move forward here. What is perhaps the greatest impact your dad had on you as a father?
One you already mentioned is just quality time. My parents, as first generation immigrants, never really had money. I mean, the Lord provided and we were fine. We were never on the streets, but we never had money. But my dad gave me quality time. And then number two, one of the best things my dad showed me was his poise. I joke that my dad, if I ever ran to him at night and said, "Hey, the house is on fire," he would grab his hand and put it on his chin and begin to think of a strategy. Not because he didn't know what to do, because he was just a methodical and he was poised under fire. I look back at those times, I look at my life now, and that's one of the things I've adapted in my life is, never to panic. In Spanish, there's this idiom that says water doesn't kill you, but panic will. So you got to stay calm, you got to think it through. So I would say those two things, quality time, and then my dad really showed me what it is to be poised under fire.
What's perhaps something that you really differ from him in your approach to fatherhood?
Here's the beauty of the podcast that you host, Corey. You really get us talking about one of the most important components of life, which is fatherhood. And while my dad is a godly man, he loves Christ, and he was a great father to me. He also let us down in some ways, and one of the ways that he let us down was he really didn't do the job he needed to do in taking care of us financially. And I don't blame him for that, and I don't hold anything against him. But that's something that, as I got older, I said, you know what, I'm going to make sure that I take care of my family. I want to spend quality time with my kids. I want to make rich memories. I want to be a model for them, a mentor for them. But I also want to make sure that I take care of my responsibilities as a family man, as a father. So that's something that, on the other side of things, that I definitely learned from him. I'm trying to do better now.
Mm, that makes perfect sense. In your own words, what's your fatherhood style, and what made you decide to take this approach?
I'm really a practitioner. I'm obsessed with learning. I love learning, but I'm one of those guys where I'm like, they just throw me in the deep end and let me see if I can figure it out. That's where I do my best learning. And even as it relates to a father, Jenny and I got married, and we really just kind of trusted the Lord on what He wanted to do as far as children. So we were only married 2 years, and we had Jace. And I would say it's funny because Jace kind of tricked us because Jace was such a good baby that we were like, man, we got to have 9 more of these things. And and then of course Gianna was born with a congenital heart disease, and that was a whole different perspective. But to your question, I would say, Corey, that my philosophical approach is to try to treat my children the way my heavenly Father treats me. In my time with God, God can be very harsh with me. God can be very direct with me. God can be very disciplinary with me. Certainly, He's done that many times in my life. But He's
Okay.
also insanely loving, insanely patient, insanely kind to me. So I try to parent in that way. If I need to be direct and strict and disciplinary with my kids, then if I need to go there, I will. But at the heart, I wanted them to know that I love them in a way that hopefully will take them the rest of their life to unpack how much I love them. And I want to be patient with them, and I want to be kind with them. And I want them to know that I'm going to always be here. As long as I'm alive, I'm going to be here for them whether they're a young child, 6 years old, or whether they're 40 years old. That as long as I'm alive, I'm going to be here for them.
What's something you wish you knew before you became a father or dad, man?
Yeah, probably a lot. Um,
I know, right? Hey, listen, you said you like to learn while in the deep end. You can prep to be a dad, but it's one of those things to where you're not going to begin to really metamorphose into the dad you want to become until you get in the deep end of that pool.
I would say something I know now that I didn't know in the beginning is that as it relates to fatherhood, man, I think I want to give a strong dedication to teaching. So I don't know that I knew that in the early years. It's kind of, do this and move on and do that and keep pressing forward. But really, man, 15 years into parenting now, into marriage and family, I, I really want to give a strong dedication to teaching. So like Jason and I right now, I'll put on maybe a basketball game at 9, 10 o'clock at night. And, as I wind down, get ready to go to bed, and he'll just come on the couch, man. And we'll just talk life. And I really want to take advantage of any teaching moments, even when I make a mistake, I want to go to my kids and say, listen, I overreacted on that one. I was upset and I just shot first and didn't think. And that's my bad. I want to apologize, and then use that as a teaching format. So I would say I really want to be a better teacher, and that's something maybe I didn't realize at the beginning of fatherhood.
Well, you drew the parallel of one of the ways that you approach fatherhood is, you viewing God as a father, and then you look to mirror his attributes or his characteristics. And you mentioned, at times he has to discipline. And so, what approach to disciplining your children do you think has proven to really help? I mean, it's never an easy job, right? But what's something that you think has proven to be helpful over the years?
What has been helpful as it relates to discipline is to preach and to practice what you preach and to mean what you preach. So for me, I don't want to run to be a disciplinarian, and that's not something I want to jump to, but I also don't want to bluff. I don't want to count to nine, and I don't want to tell you the same thing 20 times. I want you to know that when I say something or when I preach something or when something's a conviction or a value or a life principle, that I mean it. I'm not bluffing. I really mean it. So I think that has helped as it relates to discipline. That, hey, if I tell you, you're on the wrong path and you're making the wrong decisions and there's going to be discipline, that I'm not bluffing. I'm serious. And then I think I've realized as well that once I discipline in a focused manner, then I actually don't have to repeat that course many times over. So once they see, hey, I'm not bluffing, this really is a life value, then I realize I don't have to keep repeating that disciplinary action. And I think that's been helpful. And then lastly, what I just mentioned prior is that even after discipline, to teach through, to sit down with them and say, okay, listen, this is why I took this step. This is the way I see it. And like with my son Jace, we'll have a very transparent conversation. I'll tell him, listen, when you become a man and maybe leave my home, you'll be free to make other decisions. But right now, these are the principles that I enforce, and these are the reasons why. So teaching on the back end has been very helpful.
Yeah, it sounds like you give a lot of explanation in teaching. I once mentioned that one of my goals when teaching my children, I try to make things make sense
Yeah.
so that they can see it for themselves. And a lot of times, some of the things that I'm trying to teach them, it makes sense. And if I can get them to see it, then it makes sense. But on occasion, I find myself having to realize, okay, now is this just a personal preference, or is this a principle? And I think we have to be careful with that. You know what I mean? I'm not necessarily trying to turn my kids into little me's, right? So, trying to find the balance of allowing them to flourish as individuals, but still trying to instill principles. And so a lot of times if it's a disciplinary action that needs to be taken, before I look to implement, the disciplinary action, I have to say, wait a minute, is this a personal preference, or is this a principle that I'm willing to die on this hill for?
You're exactly right. I'll tell you a funny one, Corey. When Jace in particular, was younger, I remember one time distinctively him wanting cereal for dinner. And I remember coming to the kitchen like, nah, man, cereal's not for dinner. Cereal's for breakfast. We don't need cereal for dinner around here. What's wrong with you?
Right.
And it hit me. I'm like, wait, where did I get that from? And who made that law? And who made that true?
Is there even a book that dictates that you can?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I said, you know what? I don't need to fight the principle of cereal's only for breakfast. And
Right.
now, he eats cereal whenever he wants for dinner, per se. But that was one where I had to battle with myself, say, hey, why am I enforcing this and where did it come from? And be willing to change.
Corey here, wanting to give you a personal invitation to follow us on Instagram. You can find us at Dadography Podcast. It's really good because you get an opportunity to put a face with the voice that gave you some insight or some encouragement on your journey in fatherhood. We look forward to having you follow us on Instagram at Dadography Podcast. Right. Yeah. I think we have to be mindful, very mindful of what we're talking about. Personal preference and then principles. I think that'll take us a long way. I think it'll make conversation a lot easier because when we're talking with adults, right? Like let's just and we'll use a silly example, you have your favorite basketball team and I have, my favorite basketball team and whatever. Like it's just my team. It's a team that I root for, and maybe I buy a jersey or something like that and try to catch their games on television. And if possible, I try to get a ticket so I can be there, right? But the point being is that in an adult exchange, there's not this, oh my goodness, he likes this team, he's a terrible person. I mean, I guess maybe some sports extremists think that, but generally speaking, oh, he's got a preference for this. Okay, cool. But it then turns into not so much an adult conversation as it is just an individual conversation. And we definitely have to be willing to have those type of conversations with our children. I mentioned that Heaven, my daughter, my 12-year-old, really enjoys anime. And I'm just wasn't into it. It's like not my thing, right? But she did express some serious interest and was one day like, Dad, look, you gotta watch this one with me. It's really good. I sat down and watched a couple of episodes, and that particular anime, I really enjoyed. Like I totally enjoyed it. But I realized that the type of stuff that I might enjoy. I love adventure stuff. So I'll sit down and watch a documentary about a guy climbing a mountain. But that's me. That's an individual. And it's totally unfair when we look to impose our personal preferences on our kids as opposed to, disciplining them for principal matters. That's definitely something I'll be observing in myself moving forward. And it's something that I could probably grow in, I'm sure. And I'm going to be very intentional about making sure that I help them expand as individuals, but yet still instilling those principles. You know what I mean?
For sure, for sure.
You mentioned earlier that you did a missionary stint in Nicaragua for about a year. You were also a pastor. I know for a number of years you were school admin, and now you're a business owner with Synergy Solar. How have you managed, man, the work? I won't say work life balance. I'm talking about the work fatherhood balance. How do you manage that? How do you manage it?
So I would say, I I I want to make it holistic, all inclusive. So
Okay.
for me, like obviously, those things are different. But let me give you a couple examples.
Hmm.
3 years ago, I served as interim pastor for a church out in this area, and in particular, that summer, I think the year was 2016. That summer, when my son Jace was off of school, man, I took Jace to the church a lot. I mean, he was with me at the church office 3, 4 days a week, and we just hung out. I mean, he was at the church. He was spending time with some of the older deacons, and I mean, he became a household at the church and the staff. We did a lot of evangelistic work that summer for the church, and Jace was right there with me, knocking on doors, passing out tracts, sharing the gospel. And so that was one where I just want to integrate it all. Where instead of saying, "Hey, I got to work 9 to 6, and then I'll be home at 7 for dinner, and you can have me from 7 to 9," man, I want to interweave everything together. And even now, just a couple of days ago, I took 2 hours for lunch and celebrate a family birthday. And then when I went back to the office, I took two of my girls with me, and they were hanging out with me in the office for 3 hours. So for me, I just trying to integrate it all, and hopefully, one, I buy more time with them, which is really valuable time, spending time with them. But then secondarily, I want to show them, hey, Daddy's the same dude in his neighborhood, in his pajamas, at the church, in the business office. I'm the same guy. I'm not different here and different there. I'm the same guy everywhere. And hopefully when they get older, they'll see that my life values and principles were fluid in every department of my life.
Let me take a moment here and hopefully, be a blessing to the audience. Do you have any specific tips for dads that are wearing multiple hats and on how to keep fatherhood at the forefront?
Yeah, I would just say relish those opportunities, and depending on your kid's age, bring them into it. When Jace was with me, in ministry aspects of pastoring a church, he got to see ministry. Now that I'm more in the business world, he gets to see those. And I enjoy, I try to really live transparent. And I mean, for us, we operate under business as mission. So we got probably a staff around 2025, and a lot of those guys have been in my house. I mean, they come to my house for coffee, for dinner, for lunch. They know my wife, they know my kids, and hopefully, my kids get to see that whatever dad did, his life values and the motivation and reason why he did it was the same. Although it may be a different church or a different business, the why has always been the same, all of their life. And for me, in my worldview, the why is, the mission of God and the glory of God.
Okay.
So yeah, I would just say integrating it, enjoying it, talking them through, teaching them, and kind of bringing them in the journey with you.
Yeah, the integration is key. I think that's a lost art because years gone by, if your dad was a plumber, then you got exposed to plumbing at an early age, and you learned tools, and you learned how to fix different plumbing issues, which ultimately afforded you the opportunity, if you chose to be a plumber, you could make that transition fairly simply. But it sounds like it's more of an apprentice type approach to keeping them integrated and involved in whatever's going on in your life, just really keeping them uh, close, man. I guess for lack of a better term.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah. So going back a little bit, you mentioned that you lived abroad in Nicaragua for a year, Central America. I mean, you moved your entire family, number one. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was amazing. Now you're talking to me. If my wife was on a podcast, it'd probably be a whole different conversation. But for me, it was amazing, man. Kind of going back to throw me in the deep end of the pool, man. I get fired up and focused when things are difficult and challenging. Like that's when I'm probably at my best.
Right.
And moving to a whole nother country, and even though I'm second generation Hispanic, I've never lived overseas, so that was completely a new experience. And then Nicaragua is structurally totally different than the United States, than Florida. So
Right.
to learn a lot of new things as an adult. I'll tell you a quick funny story. My first couple weeks there, I quickly learned there's no such thing as 911 in Manawa. So yeah, that's like totally an American thing. So man, one of the first things that hit me, Corey, was yo, someone breaks into my house and tries to, harm my family, there's no 911. This is mano a mano, brother a brother. We're gonna have to duke it out.
Right,
And
right,
that's just a whole different thinking process than the US. You may defend yourself in the US, but you got 911. I mean, within 5, 6 minutes, you're gonna have seven police cars, lighting up your neighborhood.
right.
So yeah, when I moved there, I'm like, whoa, man, this is different. So it was exciting. It was difficult. It was a blessing. I loved it. The rhythm of life. I think I'm a missionary at heart. Um,
Okay.
I fight the American culture and the American rhythm every day. I like the Latin American culture. Um, spending time with your heavenly Father, not being rushed, meeting to meeting, agenda to agenda, spending time with people. You call somebody over and it's not like, hey, I got 45 minutes, I got to roll to the next meeting. It's, hey, have a seat, have a cup of coffee. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's totally different rhythm. So I love the rhythm of Nicaragua. Um,
What do you think is were some of the pros and cons in terms of the effect on the kids, man? Your second oldest was fairly young at the time, but maybe Jason. So, what are some of the pros and maybe cons in terms of the effects you saw that experience had on your kids?
yeah, no question. I would say, I mean, from my perspective, all pros. We mistakenly began to live in a bubble. 95% of the world lives outside of the US. But if we're not careful, we interpret the world through the lens of the United States, which in my opinion is wrong because majority of the world is not American, not North American. So there's a big world out there, so many vast cultures, and I think it was great for my kids, great for my son to see a different culture. And then, I hope and pray that when my kids are older, they begin to wrestle with the question on why did my mom and dad move to a third world country to undertake some challenges for the complete benefit of others and not for financial gain, not for personal gain. I hope they ask those questions. And then just to go some of the places that we went to in Nicaragua to see some of the things we saw, and that goes back to integration. I try to take Jace with me to as many of those places that I could, to El Mercado, to church functions, to street corners preaching the gospel and in Spanish. So, by my estimation, from a fatherhood perspective, I hope and pray that it was all beneficial, not just now, but when they get in their early 20s. I hope they really unpack that.
Sounds like it was a good experience, man. I know one of the primary reasons you moved back, and you did touch on it briefly early on in our conversation, is that one of your children had some medical challenges. Do you mind taking us through that a little bit, man?
Yeah. So, Jenny and I got pregnant with Gianna a couple years after Jace, 2 years after Jace. And about 3 months before Gianna was born, the hospital called us in for several special meetings, and we knew something was up because these were totally different, and they were bringing in like a whole crew and looking at Jenny's sonogram, so we knew something was going on. And then finally, Dr. Rock called us up to his office, and I mean, he laid the wood on us. He said, "Hey, your baby has a heart defect, and we believe she's going to make it through birth, but we're not sure. We're going to be completely prepared for anything, for an immediate open heart surgery upon birth. We have a fair grasp on the defects, but we'll really know when she's born. But we just want you to be ready that, you know, she may not survive birth. We may have to go immediately into heart surgery. There's a number of different scenarios."
Hmm.
So of course that freaked us out. We were like, "Whoa, that's heavy." And so by the grace of God, when Gianna was born, the room was loaded. Man, there was like, I don't know, probably eight to different staff members just all on standby. And Gianna was born. She did have her first open heart surgery when she was 2 months old. So she did the first 2 months on her own. I had an open heart surgery at 2 months, then had a second open heart surgery prior to us moving to Nicaragua, and we always knew there would be a third. They mapped out three strategic surgeries on her since the day she was born. So we came home on furlough from Nicaragua. We left 40-60% of our furniture there in Managua. We were planning to be home for Gianna's surgery, then move back. I was on, full missionary support, had no employment in the States. And Gianna had her third open heart surgery in 2016. And the surgery went well. And I remember the doctor called us and said, "Hey, the surgery went well. We're going to stitch Gianna back up, and
Okay.
we should bring you back up into the room in about an hour." And of course, Jenny and I were relieved. Well, 3-4 hours went by and we never got a call. So we were starting to get a little concerned that, what seemed to be the delay here. And after, 3-4 hours, the doctor came in and said, "The surgery went well, but when we went to stitch Gianna back up, her sternum has been so wore out by now the third surgery that we could not stitch it back together. It literally just fell, it just imploded upon itself, it collapsed." So he said on the spot, we put a metal bar in her chest, repaired the sternum, and then put the sternum on top of the metal bar. So he said that took another 2 hours of surgery that was unexpected and unplanned, unforeseen. And that set everything in motion. From there, we met with surgeons and doctors, and Dr. Ategi, who's been her doctor since birth. He's a great man. We've become somewhat of friends. And, he sat down with Jenny and I and just said, "Hey, I know you're a missionary and, I know you're doing the Lord's work, but it'd be my recommendation you stay stateside and we keep an eye on this bar." And he said, "We want to remove the bar next year, but it's a moving target because of her natural growth. So we really think you should stay here until she gets the bar removed from her chest." So that shifted everything. But I would say overall, God has used Gianna to teach me personally to make every day matter. Because here's the truth, man. The truth is, and, I trust the Lord, but this is the truth. Gianna's heart disease is terminal, which means these surgeries are alleviating the work of her heart, but they have not cured her heart. Her heart, as it relates to man, is uncurable. So really, every day is a gift, and that's not a metaphor. That's true for Gianna, and I think God used Gianna to teach me that hey, every day is a gift. Live every day with the joy like it's your first day on earth, but with the urgency like it's your last as well.
Hmm. You know, I'm sorry to interrupt here. I'm just thinking here as it relates to our audience and dads that are listening. That's a weighty matter to really recognize that every day is a gift. And obviously, your daughter having heart complications, it, it may be it may be easy for a father who has a perfectly healthy child to I won't say negate, they're not denying it, but just kind of overlook the fact that every day with your child is a gift. Make it matter. I can see that because if your child is, perfectly healthy and they're playing sports or what have you, then one may think, oh, well, everything's fine. And so be kind of nonchalant about the time that you have with your child. So that I think that's a very weighty matter, and I appreciate you sharing that insight, man, for sure. So three open heart surgeries, the last of which basically called you off the mission field, knowing that for all intents and purposes, from man's perspective, whatever they do, they're essentially band aids, not a cure. What words of encouragement would you have for dads who have similar circumstances? We've had some dads on with some special needs children, very heartfelt episodes. I encourage you guys to listen to those if you haven't. One that comes off the top of my head was maybe last week or week before, Omar. That's a great episode. And his son had some special needs. But in this scenario, what advice or encouragement would you give to a dad who has a child that may be suffering from some sort of terminal illness or suffering just from some serious health issues, even if it's not terminal?
Yeah, I would say what we already highlighted: enjoy every day, and then use that in a way to teach. I don't even know that Gianna fully understands the complexities of her heart. She's 9 years old right now, but we've talked about it. My son Jace, he's been old enough, particularly this last surgery, so he has seen his sister, in the hospital for weeks on end, through the surgeries. And so I would just say, use it to story tell, and then ultimately to teach life principles and to teach life values. And, for us, we not only want to enjoy every day and paint a new canvas every day, fresh and anew, but we also want to give back. We want to serve others. We have an incredible empathy and compassion to those, particularly that have heart conditions, and we want to give back in that way. And so, yeah, I would just say, making every day count and matter, and then storytelling through that particular situation, and then giving back and living a life that matters, regardless of whether someone has an illness or not. The goal is to live a life that matters, that counts, that makes a difference.
On the last surgery, Jace definitely was able to comprehend what was going on and probably gleaned a lot from it. He's your oldest. He's a preteen. He's coming of age, as it were, and many parents see that as Terrible Twos Part Two, right? So, how is his coming of age coming along as he grows closer to the teen years?
Yeah, that's been that's been interesting. Yeah, it's crazy. He's like growing up before my eyes. It's funny, man. It's crazy to see things in your kids that at first you're like, whoa, I don't know about all this, and then you're like, whoa, that's like exactly the way I was at 12. And so
Right.
it kind of hits you from two ends. So yeah, it's been interesting with Jace. I'm really trying to let him know that I am his father. There are boundaries. There is a fence. There is right and wrong. One of the is the small principle. But one of the things I try to teach him is that his mother is not just his mother. That's my wife. So when he disrespects his mother, I go up to him and I say, "Listen, you're not just being disrespectful to your mother. You're disrespecting my wife." And I got a problem on both perspectives. And just trying to use that to teach him that she's my wife, and she's a priority in my life.
Right. You you can get yourself in some deep water with that.
Yeah, yeah, no
Yeah.
question. Yeah, that's a double whammy right there.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then just talk him through, teach him through every occasion. He's getting into sports. He's playing basketball now, and he's actually getting better and better. I'm pretty impressed by it. And just using sports, which is something he's interested in now, to teach him about life principles, about working as a team, about humility. And so I just try to be there and really talk him through as everything comes afresh and anew. And then lastly, I'll give you this example. So he's also getting into music, and obviously in our household we definitely prioritize Christian music. But instead of just saying, it's only Christian music or nothing, I'm really just trying to teach him and say, Jace, think about this. You're putting lyrics straight into your ears, straight into your brains. And you really got to ask yourself this question: the music that you're trying to listen to, what is it inspiring you? What does it rev you up for and towards? I mean, fighting, making money, girls, or being a better human, being a better man, being successful, fruitful. And I try to help them think it through, like, really comes down to what fruit is this music producing in your life. And then when you see that, are you pleased with that fruit? If it leads you to be a jerk and mean and unkind, I mean, is that the person you want to be? So just helping them kind of think it through.
Yeah. Myself, I listen to a lot of culture reggae music. And I remember my oldest son, Christian, he asked me, this has been years ago, but he asked me, he's like, why do you listen to so much reggae music? You want to be Jamaican? I was like, no, no, no. I was like, I just like the positive vibes in the music, like I just like the positivity of it.
Yeah,
If I gotta have something in my ear constantly, why not make it positive? And I've drawn the picture with my younger kids of, a person that eats ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's like, all right, maybe some ice cream for dessert won't ruin you overall, right? But you start chomping down on ice cream, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, don't be surprised when diabetes or this or that, like, come on, man, you saw this coming, right? And as we feed our brain, right? If we feed our brain ice cream, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, listen, man, same thing. Don't be surprised. Well, Andres, let me tell you, I'm really grateful for you coming on to the show today and allowing myself as well as our listeners to travel with you a little bit on your journey of fatherhood. And we really grateful. Also, I hope that you guys will continue to experience continued health and well-being for your daughter, Gianna. And really grateful, man, for you coming on the show. Really
yeah.
grateful for
Thank you,
that. Yeah.
brother. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Well, guys, this has been another episode of Dadography. Thank you for tuning in to the Dadography podcast.
Some good insights on this one, Andres. Let's start with paying attention to the principles you are enforcing. Are you holding on to things simply because that's the way your grandparents did them? Reevaluate them and, when necessary, be willing to change them.
Mean what you say, practice what you preach, and don't bluff when it comes to disciplining your child. If you tell them you're going to take away the iPad, take away their iPad. And remember to use the disciplining moments as teaching moments, not just as an enforcer.
If you're having a hard time balancing work, life, and fatherhood, try to find a way to mix them. If possible, bring your child to work and let them see who you are all around.
Lastly, use those hard lessons in life to teach principles and values. Every day above ground is a gift that should be appreciated. Gracias, Andres. Sending positive vibes to you and your little girl. Thanks, guys. See you all next week. We got a great one coming up.